Welcome, everyone. School board meeting is called to order. Will you please stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Garza, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Seberg,
Here.
Vice Chair Stevens,
Here.
Mrs. Williams,
Here.
Mr. Hollingsworth,
Here.
Mrs. Brooks,
Here.
Mrs. Ball,
Here.
Mr. Iqbal,
Here.
Ms. VP,
Here.
Ms. Island.
Here.
Thank you.
Dr. Newman, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Can I get a motion for the public meeting agenda?
Chair, I'd like to move that the School Board of the City of Manassas approve the public meeting agenda as presented.
I have a motion by Mrs. Spall, second by Mrs. Brooks. The School Board of the City of Manassas approve the public meeting agenda as presented. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next up is board committee reports. We have none today. Moving along to citizens' comments. Hold on. Point of order, we'll go back to superintendent's announcements and spotlights. Mrs. Radford.
Thank you, Chair Seberg. Good evening, other members of the board, and good evening to everyone that has joined us tonight, and certainly good evening to everyone who is joining us virtually online. I don't have any spotlights for tonight, but I do have a couple of announcements that I'd like to make and do a highlight of some of the things that are happening this month in some of our schools, or in all of our schools across the district. I want to start off with Bully Prevention Month. The VSBA has deemed October as Bullying Prevention Month. It's also World and National Bully Prevention. And as you can see, on October 3rd, we had World Day of Bullying Prevention. It was our Blue Shirt Day. Across the division, we saw people rocking the blue, or the hashtag was Blue Up. You can see our schools committed to blue, and it was great to see our central office departments, the superintendent, and members of our school board wearing blue or representing messages of kindness. As you can see, Ms. Williams there with a Be Kind message on her shirt. That was a part of the theme for anti-bullying this month. What our schools have been encouraged to do is to make friends with someone you don't know at school, to stand up for others, to be inclusive, to spread kindness across the division, and reaching out to make sure that their fellow peers feel included in everything. We also, once again, partnered with the Hat Not Hate anti-bullying campaign. You will see here shortly that students and staff will don hats donated by knitters, crocheters, and loomers from across the country. We did this last year. Many of you remember seeing a lot of those different shades of blue crocheted hats, and it was great to see the activities that were going on in the schools, the spirit that was going on. This week, several of our students will be featured on The She Show. We did that last year. It was a privilege for our students to be asked to join that podcast. And so again, this year on October the 13th, I believe, that's this Thursday, from 11 to 11:25, and we'll definitely share that on all of our social media outlets so that people can see our students that have been chosen as ambassadors to talk about how the campaign affected them even last year and the things that they'll be participating in for this year. Additionally, bully prevention happens throughout the rest of the month. So till the end of October, you'll definitely see other activities and events going on in the schools. But we have something going on at each location, and some of them shared some of the things they'll be doing. At Baldwin Elementary, creating a bullying prevention bulletin board in the main hallway, bullying prevention classroom counseling lessons, Spirit Week or Spirit Fridays, Over at Jenny Dean, you'll see announcements being made each week to promote bully prevention on their Dolphin School broadcast. They have a band against bullying. Each student will make a bookmark for their bulletin board. They'll be wearing blue on October the 28th to band against bullying and encourage kindness and standing up for others. Let me see. We have over at Round Elementary, daily themes or spirit days like Crazy for Kindness, Crazy Hair Day, door decorations contest, bully prevention, I'm sorry, that's at Hayden, bully prevention classroom lessons. At Round Blue every Friday, they're issuing challenges to students about making friends and being kind, and they're also doing door decorating contests there. At Weems, they plan to do counseling guidance lessons, defining bullying, stop, walk, talk, and being an upstander, bulletin board creation, say boo to bullying in the spirit of October, principal chat parent presentations. Over at Baldwin Intermediate, they have Stump Out the Bullying pledge, social media shout outs all month long, daily morning announcements and discussions. At Mayfield, classroom anti-bullying lessons, a friendship focus group, which is going to be exciting for them to have some discussions with their peers, bully prevention kindness quilts. Over at Met, Spirit Wear, something that's called Sock Out Bullying, where they get to wear their favorite socks and feature those. They'll be having a superhero day and a poster contest. And then over at Osborne, they're planning anti-bully advisory lessons. They have Leave Your Positive Feathered Note on the Eagle banner, Bully Prevention Spirit Week, and then their PBIS, that's their Positive Behavior Intervention Support System, the collaboration with student-focused bully prevention initiatives throughout the entire month. So our students are engaged, they're having a great time reaching out, to each other and encouraging kindness. I think this year's message was unapologetically kind. And so we want to just stay in line with the spirit of the blue, but then world bullying, I think, is orange. So you'll see shades of orange and blue throughout the rest of the month. So if you're in any of the schools, please encourage our students, look at the many bulletin boards and different things that they'll have going on. And we want to welcome people into the buildings to see all of that and to participate and to help us carry on that message. Finally, we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month across the division, and it will continue through October 15th. And it's always a good time to celebrate our diversity and our cultures. There's always a good time. Every day is a good time to do so. But here in this Hispanic Heritage Month, you can see here we have several displays of things that have been going on. Ms. Nestor's ESOL students at METS created a display celebrating Hispanic culture and history. And then in our pre-K world, our Laura Perez Ruiz, who is the K through 6 ESOL specialist for MCPS, she spoke to Jenny Dean pre-K students about Puerto Rico, which is where she's from, and the students really enjoyed that. Pre-K students around the division read books and made crafts relating to Hispanic heritage. And then I had the privilege of going over to Osborne on Sunday afternoon. Osborne High School Latin American Studies students advertised the school's first Hispanic Heritage Festival. Around the city, it was a lot of people that showed up. I saw some of our school board members that were able to join them. Lots of music, the students that were dancing, they did a marvelous job. Food and vendors that were there. The event was held this past Sunday, October 8th, and they had a great turnout. So again, celebrations are going on around the division, awareness is going on around the division, and we want to continue to encourage our students to be inclusive, to celebrate our diversity, and to just enjoy their school experiences. So that's it for us tonight for our announcements.
Thank you, Mrs. Radford. Still have no board committee reports this evening, and we will move on to citizens' comments. At this time, we welcome citizens who wish to speak about services, policies, and affairs of the City of Manassas Public Schools. Because we have an agenda we need to complete, we ask that the comments be limited to 3 minutes. We appreciate the time you have taken to be here. We treat citizens' comments as a public hearing, and we do not engage in conversation with speakers. The lack of an immediate response to your comments should not be taken as a lack of interest or concerns. Please be respectful when presenting your comments. And first up, we have Monica Cardona. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Monica. My daughter goes to Osborne High School. Her name is Jackie. I recently on Wednesday took her out of school. She's currently not going to school because she had 27 absences, and I wasn't able to. I had a meeting with her counselor and the student attendance teacher there, and I explained to them my situation, and they weren't able to give me solutions to how to keep her in school. So after a few days of having Jackie home and trying to figure out how to homeschool her, I emailed her counselor again. He gave me some information from from Manassas City Homeschool, and I haven't heard back from them. But overall, looking at my daughter's emails, looking at different things from school, I found out a few things that her advisory teacher, I believe, I could be wrong, but from reading the emails that I have, was condoning her skipping school with her boyfriend. And I spoke to her many times, and I asked her personally if Jackie was going to school, to just, keep me tabs on her, to just be on the right track. And she would always tell me she's in school, that she's doing fine, that she's passing. When I went to the meeting, her passing grades are already just the grades that, principal gives them already as a passing grade, which I don't believe that's even trying to, pass. So last Sunday, my daughter kind of ran away, and she went to her teacher's house. And I had to call the cops to make sure, the cops also hear her out and hear her side of the story. But I trusted, all my life, I trusted teachers to do the right thing. And I think the right thing is to let parents know what's going on with their kids, not condone skipping, being tardy, and cover up for them. And that's where I'm at right now. Nobody was able to guide me to other choices for her to have other choices to go to school. Because if I drop her off every morning to school and she's not going, and then I go pick her up, so many things can happen to her on the streets. We come from Fairfax County schools, and if we were 3 minutes late, there wasn't a soul in the street. Here, I can come any day of the time. There's kids outside all day long.
Ms. Cardona, that's your 3 minutes is up. If there's anything else you'd like to say, you can certainly email us with further information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak tonight? Hearing and seeing none, we will move along. I have a motion for the consent agenda.
Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Vice Chair Stevens, second by Mrs. Brooks. The school board of the city of Manassas approved the consent agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Tonight on the discussion agenda, we have student achievement, an update on the strategic plan and student achievement. Mr. Gefeller and Dr. Casada, thank you.
Good evening, Chair Seberg, Vice Chair Stevens, members of the board, and Dr. Newman. Tonight, Dr. Casada and I will be providing an update on student achievement connected to the strategic plan pillar of inclusive and collaborative learning environment. As part of the promise we made to the board when they adopted the new strategic plan, we will be providing periodic updates connected to each of the pillars of the strategic plan. Tonight is the first of those updates. This presentation focuses on inclusive and collaborative learning environment and how it is connected to student achievement. The topics we will address tonight include an update on early literacy and a follow-up to the presentation on the targeted support block that will provide examples of how the early literacy data are being used to identify and group students for targeted interventions. Dr. Quesada will then share 2022 graduation and dropout rate data and a follow-up to the accreditation discussion last month to explain how the academic review process and our new continuous improvement planning process support our efforts in enhancing inclusive and collaborative learning environments at all levels. Our first data point to share with you is the Fall PALS. This is the phonemic awareness and literacy screening data. We already have fall results for students in grades 1 and 2. Kindergarten results are not quite available yet. If you recall, when we presented data this summer, we examined the growth of students made from fall of 2021 to spring of 2022. This time, we are looking at comparisons of last fall, 21, to this current fall. And you can see on the slide that both grades 1 and 2, the percentage of students meeting or exceeding benchmarks is higher this fall than last fall. The green numbers show the percentage point differences. Notably, in grade 1, the percent of students meeting or exceeding benchmarks improved by 24 percentage points, from 32 to 56%. At grade 2, the percent of students meeting or exceeding benchmarks improved 8 percentage points, from 33% to 41%. I also want to highlight that the 24% difference in first grade represents an accelerated growth compared to the state, which only had an acceleration of 11 percentage points. And in second grade, our acceleration was an 8-point difference from the fall of 21 to fall of 22, and the state was a 4% gain. So we far exceeded the state acceleration rates in terms of first grade and second grade PALS data. So just to be clear, we have been proactive in addressing the learning loss. We began the process of responding to the needs of our students last school year and have redoubled our efforts to capitalize on the strategies that we started in the 2021-22 school year. These improvements can be tied directly to the enhanced focus on early literacy that began in Manassas City Public Schools during the 2021-22 school year and is continuing this school year. We began to see benefits of this work last year, but are seeing stronger benefits this year. Some schools have higher proportions of students meeting benchmarks now than they did at the end of last school year. Our enhanced and strategic focus on literacy is a cornerstone of the inclusive and collaborative learning environment pillar. An example of what we started last year and continue to do is our PALS remediation block, our IMSE, our Institute for Multisensory Education, the Orton Gillingham training for our teachers, and Haggerty Learning Resources that focuses on early literacy skills. So at the last meeting, you learned about the Targeted Support Block Plan, which is aligned with the MCPS Strategic Plan, School-Wide Continuous School Improvement Plan, Team and Teacher SMART Goals, and most importantly, Student Learning Goals. This vertical alignment infographic illustrates how the targeted support is related to the division and school-based improvement planning. Tonight, I'm going to share an example of how the early literacy data is being used to identify students for targeted interventions during the targeted support block. In the next two slides, I'm going to share the process for designing targeted intervention and an example of what this looks like for an individual student. So if you look at the graphic, we look at our data, first and foremost, where students are currently performing. And then we have students, and we use that data, and teachers will use a correlation chart to identify a correct spelling stage based on the information from the spelling and phonics report that we get from the PALS assessment. And then we have the teachers will plan and will select corresponding scope and sequence. We will group students according to spelling stage, and then we select and develop appropriate lesson plans to meet those students' needs. And so, as I said, students complete the fall's PALs. Those spelling stages will be the primary data point for guiding us during the targeted support block groupings. For kindergarten through second grade, this data comes directly from that PALS spelling and phonemics and phonics report. So after we analyze that data as teachers, as individual teachers, as teams of teachers, they use that correlation chart, and then they develop those lessons, and based on that is how they're going to group students. So I want to share it and drill down to you just so you all are aware of the in-depth planning that we're doing in really looking at individual students. So I want to walk you through an example of what this would look like on a day-to-day basis in our schools. This is an example created for illustrative purposes only, and this is not an actual student. So in our example, we look at Gabriel, who is a second grader. He took the PALs and scored 12 points in spelling, which is below the second grade fall benchmark score of 20. This score would identify Gabriel as a phonetic speller, and students who are phonetic spellers across first and second grade at his school will be grouped together to work with a teacher and focus on their individual needs. This teacher would use the targeted support plan for these spellers. Instructional staff have provided lesson plans and lesson plan templates and other resources to support students in these interventions. So there's been a lot of thought put into place and resources for teachers, but really using that data to drive how we are making decisions based on individual students. And so I now want to turn it over to Dr. Quesada, and she is going to provide you information on the academic review process, our on-time graduation, and our dropout rate.
All right, good evening, Chair Seberg, Vice Chair Stevens, school board members, and Dr. Newman. I'll now be sharing graduation and dropout data as well as some updates on accreditation and our continuous improvement planning process in support of the new strategic plan. So the state of Virginia published on-time graduation rate data at the end of September. So Manassas City Public Schools and Osborne High School had an on-time graduation rate of 82.4%. This rate is a cohort rate. What does that mean? It means it represents the percentage of students who graduate within 4 years of beginning high school. English learners and students with disabilities who remain in school are allowed more time to graduate, and they do what the state calls slide into the next cohort as long as they stay in school, because by federal law they're allowed to stay in school longer. Virginia also published the dropout rate. For Osborne, this rate was 14.4%. This represents the percentage of that same cohort who dropped out or discontinued schooling during the course of high school. Students who transfer to other schools in the state or outside of the state, as well as students who are known to have left the country, are not included in the dropout counts. In response to this data, MCPS in general and Osborne in specific are engaged in an enhanced continuous improvement planning process and as part of the focus on the cycle that works. Through a cycle that works, the schools focus on aligning lessons and assessments. Data is being used to identify individual student needs for students at risk of dropping out or not graduating. Additional interventions in place include a reading teacher at the school who works with students who are struggling, ESOL and special education teachers looking at student individual education plans to make sure that services match student needs. The school's offering a Saturday seminar, mentoring programs, and there's now outreach from the new family liaison. In addition, at the district level, we're analyzing course offerings to ensure that courses are aligned with the needs of our students. If you recall, back in August, we presented some achievement data for all schools by subject area. And as a connection to that presentation and the last presentation about accreditation, this chart shows the accreditation for each school, accreditation status for each school in MCPS. As you can see, we have 7 schools that are accredited and 2 schools that are accredited with conditions. So that means that they had 1 or more indicators at level 3. Metz Middle School is accredited with conditions due to performance in science, and as a connection to what I just shared, Osborne is accredited with conditions due to the dropout rate. In response to that student data and accreditation ratings, MCPS is engaging in academic reviews. So all schools identified as accredited with conditions and those with any level 2 indicators are participating in these academic reviews. School and division leadership have participated in training sessions with VDOE about monitoring progress and conducting these academic reviews. And also, MCPS division leadership will have monitoring meetings with VDOE. These academic reviews are designed to help schools and divisions do the following: identify and implement systems and processes that directly impact student outcomes. This is done through examining artifacts and comparing them to specific criteria that the state has articulated, and then we will reveal targeted areas for improvement that are then included in the school's continuous improvement plan, and more on that in a minute. MCPS is embracing the academic review process to supplement the efforts already underway through the implementation of a cycle that works. These academic review tools are differentiated based on the identified needs. They're tools to support the examination of dropout, graduation, and chronic absentee data, including looking at which groups of students are at risk and providing targeted support for them. In addition, an examination of the processes in place is part of this review. Instructionally focused reviews include lesson plan evaluations and instructional leadership tools that involve classroom observations. These tools help us look reflectively at practices in line with our examination of the standards that we're teaching through our collaborative learning teams. These reviews are a partnership. MCPS division leadership will conduct the reviews in partnership with school leadership, and then findings from these reviews will be incorporated into each school's continuous improvement plan. And then finally, with the reviews, MCPS will submit academic review reports to the Virginia Department of Education. The academic review process is only one facet of the continuous improvement work going on. All schools in MCPS are conducting comprehensive needs assessments and updating their continuous improvement plans in response to these analyses. I have personally met with each individual school team to support them in their needs assessment, and I'm working with them in goal setting and improvement plan development. To clarify, the needs assessment are the first step that schools take as they focus on data analysis and root cause analysis. So not what does the data say, but what's causing that and what can we do about it? What things are within our control? These needs assessments identify the priority focus areas that are part of the continuous improvement plans, which then identify specific goals, strategies, and the essential actions that schools will take. So MCPS has invested in a new online tool for completing and monitoring continuous improvement plans. This tool allows for collaborative development of the plans at the school level and for transparency so schools can see each other's plans. Principals, assistant principals, instructional facilitators, and some central office staff have been trained in the use of this tool. And this tool now includes a required monitoring component with checkpoints throughout the year. The plans will be reviewed and approved by Executive Cabinet and will be monitored and reviewed quarterly to make any necessary adjustments based on data along the way. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present this update to you tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Quesada and Mr. Gefeller. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Who's first? Mrs. Spall.
Dr. Quesada, thank you. I congratulate you on the marked improvement in our accelerating accreditation scores. And I thank you for clarifying the differentiation happening with targeted support blocks. I'm curious if you can give specific examples of what we're doing at METS specifically about science.
So I can give you what's going to happen with the academic review for science, and I can defer to Mr. Gefeller for anything more. Because METS was identified for science, when we do the academic review, they've been trained and they already have tools to be looking at their classroom lessons, instructional leadership practices, and so in their collaborative learning teams, they're already focusing in the area of science, and then in the review, we'll be looking at, okay, what evidence do you have to see, what's happening, what needs to change in order to get us there? Do you want to add?
Just to add to that, our science coordinator, our K-12 science coordinator, has been involved with METS this year. She was as well last year, but she's been working with teachers side by side with them to look at the lessons. We're looking at the hands-on science piece. We have a curriculum through STEM Scopes, which is a hands-on science curriculum for our science labs, and so there's been a lot of support for the teachers there to look at how are we actually teaching science concepts. Our ESOL coordinators as well have been involved over there supporting teachers in how are we adapting curriculum to make sure that the language is not becoming a barrier or an obstacle for our students to learn science concepts. So there's a lot of support that we are providing in addition to what Dr. Quesada shared in terms of how we're supporting them with science.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask about slide 7 then? Okay, for Gabriel, if he is scored as a 12 and his goal is at least a 20, is he grouped with other 12s alone? Or is he grouped like, by a factor of 5 or?
No. He is
10?
grouped with similar students who have similar needs. So he would be grouped, the other students in his group would have a similar data point as he has so that we can really target that instruction. Unless I would say to you, the only caveat would be if he is the only 12 in that grade level, then he's going to get a one-on-one provided, interventions for that, what he needs in particular.
Okay, but as best you can, you put each integer together with their
Yes.
other like people?
Yep.
Okay, I think I had one other question. Yeah, just about, meetings and alignments and reviews are all helpful, but they are time-consuming. And are we looking at, I guess a common word that we're using now is just teacher burnout, but are we doing our best to support our teachers as they're moving through this new way of doing business?
So in terms of the reviews, what we're trying to do, and one of the reasons that we're working in partnership with the schools is not to be adding a whole bunch of burden on to the teachers on top of what they're doing, because this work all aligns with what they're doing already in their collaborative learning teams. The academic review tools they can incorporate into those discussions that they're already having, and then we'll be having meetings with a selected group of folks at the school that the school identifies, and those are only a couple of meetings. So it's not adding a lot of extra time. It's reflective and using tools during the discussions that they're already engaged in, and they align quite nicely with the work that they're doing around unpacking the standards and working with Dr. Jones at METS as the example in science.
Okay.
And just if I could add, just to put a fine point on what Dr. Casada shared, we're not asking schools to do this for the Virginia Department of Education. We're asking things, these are best practices. And so we're doing these things to impact student learning. And so these are things that we are having, if they're not in place, we're putting them in place. And so it is not to just appease the Department of Education. It is to make a difference, a real difference for student learning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Spall. Mrs. Williams.
Thank you, Mrs. Spall. Great questions. And I want to thank you and your staff for putting this together. This organizational systematic approach is truly what's going to help us move forward from our challenges of the last couple years. What I've read, there's 5 basics to a successful school. One is focusing closely on the students and what they're learning, what they need to learn. A second is that they collaborate, which is exactly what you guys are doing, on how to teach the material. They assess frequently to see if students are proficient and on track to have learned what you're teaching them. They use data to find patterns and change to the instruction to make sure that students are on track or to get on track. And then they build relationships. This program, I call it a program, it's not a program, it's a process. It's exactly what we need, and I appreciate the hard work that everybody's doing. I know it's a lot to learn, and it's going to take some time for everybody, definitely down to the teacher level, to get used to it, but it is the right approach. I had a couple questions. You answered one of my questions. I think this is the exact approach that we're going to need in order to meet our benchmarks that we set in 5 years. I'd like to ask you a question about your experience on laying out with this 5-year strategic plan and meeting that 80%. We're 80% is what we're trying to meet across the board in math, reading, PALS. So we need the proficient levels to be real high. if we're going to meet those, do you see in your experience that easing grading criteria and really allowing students to, my son never had to turn in homework. I think it's impacting a lot of these students now. I know COVID was such a different scenario. In your experience, do you think perhaps our expectations of these kids to really truly meet higher grades, not do the 50, let it be at a teacher's discretion, having deadlines, allowing these kids to also, as they learn and grow and they fail, they grow more, so they really do learn the material. My fear is if they're not learning the material, if we just pass through our students when it does come time for high school and SOLs and passing those type of benchmarks, that we're not going to meet that 80% threshold that we're striving for.
So what I would say is, in terms of expectations, we want high expectations for all of our students. And if we're going to achieve the goal of 80%, that we need aggressive growth.
Correct.
And so when we look at that and how we are doing that, we're really trying to shift a focus, and it really is a culture shift from shifting from a focus on teaching to a focus on learning. And so, which is why we are spending a lot of our time looking at how are we teaching things, just the things that you talked about. Those are the things that we know are going to make an impact. I think when you look at each individual child and what they need, we have to shift in terms of looking at it from my child, your child, but our kids. And so that's, going back to looking at student achievement data and setting, going back to the 80% of the strategic plan, which is why we are looking at developing collaborative team goals. And so not just individual teacher goals, but collaborative goals, and looking at what are the processes that are in place, a team has in place in terms of looking at how we're moving kids forward. In terms of grading, I think that there's two different things. There's grading, and then there is looking at what is a child's grade and what are they learning. And so we are really trying to focus and really pinpoint, how are we intervening for kids that are not learning it based on the material. We also want to make sure that we have equitable practices and that we're not basing a student achievement grade on student behavior, or on making sure that if we have students who do not have support at home are not being unduly penalized in terms of homework grades, as opposed to a child who has support at home. And so we're trying to look at making sure that we are focusing on the learning that is happening on a day-to-day basis, and it is an accurate reflection of what a child can do with the content they're being taught. Did you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it. He said what I was going to say.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. All right, and as far as our on-time graduation and dropout rates, Virginia's on-time graduation rate as a whole on average was 92%. Their dropout rate was 5%. So we're still quite a bit below state average. So as far as high expectations, teaching to each student so that they're actually learning the material, then that brings me, especially after our comment this evening, expectations in the classroom, and how are we truly supporting our teachers? Our teachers, I feel like they have so much, I just hear they have so much on their plate. Yeah. And then to have to try and manage a classroom with poor behavior, what kind of systems are in place to address those this year?
So, one of the things in terms of, asking teachers to do, I hear that too, asking teachers to do more. One of the things that we have tried to do is to look at what, asking, and one of the things that I've asked the staff that I work with is what do we need to continue doing and what do we need to stop doing? And I think sometimes it's hard to stop doing some of the things, and so instead of adding more things on, and so we have taken a look at what do we need to stop doing as a division in terms of quote-unquote programs. And really, so we've tried to really peel back and protect teacher time in terms of collaborative learning time and planning time. You know, we have coordinators that have been spending a lot of time in schools supporting teachers. We have an MTSS specialist, and our reading coordinator has been developing actual lesson plan templates, sitting side by side with teachers to help them plan, to help them set realistic, attainable, and aggressive growth targets for kids. And so I think there's a lot of things that are happening. And we're also giving, you know, our leaders support as well. You know, we have our new principals. We have, as you know, 4 new principals in the division. They all have retired, successful retired principals that are supporting them and mentoring them. We have a new induction program for our new principals to try to help them to navigate, to support their teachers. You know, so we know where we're at. We know where we have to get to. And it's going to take a lot of hard work, but it's also going to take the right work. You know, you can work hard and not get results. And so we're trying to make sure that the work is also the right work, and it's also the hard work that has to happen.
Hard work, you're exactly right. And then just because of our comment we had this evening, how does a student slip through the cracks to that extent?
So without knowing the specifics of that
Okay.
situation, it would be
Fair.
difficult for me to say how that happened, but we want to make sure that all of our kids stay in school. We want to make sure that we are meeting the needs of that family, of that child, and so you know, I certainly we want to look and see what happened and how can we correct that.
That's fair. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Iqbal, do you have any questions or comments? Mrs. Brooks? Mr. Hollingsworth? Vice Chair Stevens?
Thank you. I want to go back a little bit to the targeted support blocks. I'm familiar with it because I'm trained in it, but I think a lot of other people are not. The Institute of Multisensory Education and the Orton Gillingham approach to reading. If you could explain that just briefly, what it is and how it aligns with all this new research on the science of reading.
Sure. So there's the new Virginia Literacy Act that mandates that school systems teach using the science of reading. And so the Orton Gillingham is a highly structured approach that breaks reading and spelling down into smaller skills and involving letter and sounds. And then what they do is they build on these skills over time. It's a first approach to explicit and direct sequential, systematic, multisensory instruction for our students that focus on early literacy skills, so that we're not having students in, you know, upper grades and in middle school that are unable to read. It really involves a lot of a very direct and systematic approach.
And I know that prior to COVID, our SPED department had a number of teachers who were trained through the Institute of Multisensory Education. Where are we with teachers in general, especially at the elementary level, being trained?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I will tell you the majority of our elementary school teachers are trained.
Okay.
Dr. Goldstein, do you have Yep. It's substantial, and we sent several teachers, I mean, at every school. Our focus has been on primary grades, and we also have trained some teachers in up to 4th grade and in the intermediate schools. But our primary focus has been really focusing on the early years to get them. We know if we can get them reading early, the better they're going to do later on.
So how are we, because we haven't been using this approach to reading that long, what are we doing with our students who are METS, Osborne, who are still at that very low level of reading, who didn't have that foundational instruction through the Orton Gillingham approach? How are we addressing their reading deficits?
So this year we are, and last year, but this year in particular, we've hired reading support teachers for our middle school and for our intermediate schools as well, and for our high school. And they are working with students in small group instruction, focused on, again, where they're at. If they're a phonetic speller, we're going to pull in phonemical awareness lessons and activities to provide that student what they need. And so we have provided a lot of training. We had a consultant by the name of Kitty Williams here, and she has spent time at the intermediate schools training staff in how to support small group instruction for our kids, our struggling readers. And so there's been a lot of support and emphasis. We're not just focusing on elementary, we're focusing on really K-12.
Okay. And what are we doing to assess them frequently to ensure that it's actually working?
So there's a variety of things. There's a formal assessments that we use. We use the curriculum assessment measures, the CAMs. We use the SRM. We use Achieve 3000. These are all formalized assessments that we are using. We use the developmental word knowledge inventory. I just came before the meeting here. I was with a 4th grade team over at Round Elementary School, and they were looking at the developmental word knowledge inventory and looking at where their students. They've been doing the targeted support for 3 weeks now, and they have been an early adopter of this plan, and they're seeing remarkable increases for their students. And now they're talking about giving the next assessment that they were creating and looking at the assessment of what they're going to do and how they're going to do that, and so that they get the most important information and the needed information they can to regroup students across the grade level. So there's a combination of things that they're using to assess. There's formal, and then there's also informal assessments. There's anecdotal notes they're taking during how they're observing during the classroom. Their teams are developing very specific short assessments for kids that can be completed quickly that will give them good information. We're very sensitive. We're not looking to over-assess students.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that the bulk of the time is being spent in instruction, but you have to have that assessment data and that information so that we can make the most meaningful decisions about how do we proceed with an individual child.
Okay. And then if we can jump to the academic reviews, I think it's slide 11. Can you, and I don't know if you can you briefly talk about what that looks like let's say in a CLT meeting? Can you explain?
Sure, I can talk about it not exactly in what it looks like in a CLT meeting, right? But the process involves using tools, right, that are require you to collect a bunch of different types of evidence, right? So for a situation when you're looking at instruction, an instructional area, there's classroom lesson evaluation and instructional leadership, like rubrics that schools have to complete, and we'll do those in partnership with them, and the state suggests, and we suggest all sorts of different types of evidence. Some of that is observations that the principals or assistant principals or central office staff are doing in the classrooms. It's comparing classroom lesson plans to what they're seeing in practice. It's discussions at the collaborative learning teams. Those are examples of the evidence that are used to say, okay, here are the processes we have in place for identifying students for support. Here's the processes we have in place for making sure we're assessing our students' progress, particularly in those areas where we've been identified as needing to improve or accelerate our instruction so that performance and achievement can accelerate. So it's just providing a little bit more structure around the conversations that are already happening, but the CLT work doesn't have to change in response to this. As Mr. Gefeller said, it's all about moving instruction forward. The tools just kind of provide a way for us to come in and have a conversation structured around a particular document where we can all look at the same rubric and say, okay, let's look at these sources of evidence, and it just requires us to pull things together more systematically and look at them and say, okay, do we all agree that here's where we are and here's where we need to go? And if we're not where we want to be, what do we need, and what resources can we as central office marshal to support you, right? Those aligned foundational supports for the strategic plan can we provide across central office to make sure that something's happening? You've seen examples already in terms of time being provided with those extra half days and things. Those little bits of time make a huge difference for teachers to be able to engage and plan at the beginning so that they can improve instruction and target it along the way. The more we get into the year with the assessment, those discussions then reflect responses to where students are and what teachers are needing, right? And then if teachers need particular support, there's resources from our professional growth specialists and others to go in. But then the academic review, there'll be a team of folks from central office and school-identified folks who will collaboratively look at a rubric and say, okay, here's where we're at. And then that's part one. We can look again and then take, okay, here's where we need to go in your school improvement plan. We're going to make sure that that's documented as what we'll call essential actions that have to happen to move forward, and then we monitor that along the way. It's not just, okay, here, we've rated it, see you later, we've done a report, goodbye. No, it's an ongoing collaborative conversation, and it's tied directly to that continuous improvement plan process.
So there's a part of me that worries that there will be an impression in some ways that it's punitive towards some teachers. What are we doing on that front?
I don't, when we look at, in terms of punitive, you say punitive, when we look at the evaluation process, for example, and I think that can be sometimes seen as punitive, when you look at that, we're really looking at, and we have provided training this year to our administrators in looking at the performance process for teachers so that we have a consistent implementation across the division from a standards-based approach, so that it is not seen as punitive. In terms of looking at, for example, student achievement data, you're looking at multiple measures of student achievement data and looking at a holistic approach about what's happening in a school or with a teacher to make it objective and not subjective. And so we have done a lot of training this year, then at least, I've only been here a year and not even quite a year and a half, but I can tell you we've done a lot of training this year compared to last year in terms of the teacher evaluation process, because we want to make sure that it is an improvement process and not a punitive process. If I could go back to what Dr. Quesada was saying to your previous question, last year we had the head of the Office of School Quality from Virginia Department of Education brought a team here. We volunteered for that. It was an optional, and they came here and they gave us a lot of information and things in terms of things to think about as we're looking at a potential of an academic review, because we want to make sure that our processes and our systems and our lesson plan template, for example, is in alignment with best practice. And so particularly at Osborne, the lesson planning template that we're using has the components that are aligned to the Virginia Education Department, and that's based on what they know to be effective strategies and effective things to include in a lesson plan to move students forward with learning. For example, we talk about level of learning, going back to expectations. We want to make sure that the level of instruction in a classroom is aligned with the level of expectation that Virginia says a student should have to know and be able to do on a particular standard. And so we spend a lot of time, and you look at the lesson template for Osborne and for all of our schools, you will see where we're having discussions there around what is the level of learning expected. Is it a level 1, simply identify, or is it a level 4, that's analyze a problem and analyze a solution and create a higher level thinking in terms of, so that we are making sure that we are leveling according to what is expected by the Virginia Standards of Learning. And that's where it goes back to standards-based approach. We're looking at the objectivity of things and not the subjectivity of things, and making sure that we are not, for lack of a better word, watering down the curriculum, that we are holding students accountable and we are holding teachers accountable and principals accountable to what Virginia says students should be able to know and be able to do at the end of each grade level.
Okay, so for example, at Osborne, our curriculum, our lesson plan template is aligned specifically with the Standards of Learning curriculum framework, where you can go into those standards of learning and see the expectation at each grade level, like let's say in language arts, the expectation at each grade level of what that child should be able to do. And so that template is aligned specifically with that through the VDOE.
The template is not aligned to the curriculum framework.
Okay.
The template is aligned to the components of what we know is best practice to get students to a point where they are going to be able to know and be able to do the standards on a particular content area. All grade levels, including Osborne, every grade level across the state of Virginia has standards, and they are outlined in the curriculum framework documents.
Right.
And so in those documents, there is a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information in terms of it gives you the standard, and then it gives you important things, teacher notes, to make sure that you are including as part of your lesson plan development, to make sure that you're hitting on certain things. You may have a standard that says students will understand main idea. Well, what does that really mean for fiction? What does that mean for nonfiction? And so that's part of the reason we have collaborative learning teams. Their cycle that works, right, is that they're really delving into those curriculum framework documents and then capturing how are we going to teach this in a way that students are going to be able to achieve at the level that Virginia expects them to achieve at. And that's where our template that we have, that we adopted and are using, because we want to make sure, and it's not about just filling in the template, it's about that is a guide for our process and for our lesson development, because those things are research-based. You know, it even goes down to, for example, we're including what language do we need to use? What are some key vocabulary for our English language learners? That we make sure that we're pre-teaching some of that so that they can access the grade level content. So it's a very thoughtful process and a lot of conversation. So it's to making sure that we're hitting on all the right components.
Okay. Thank you. Let's talk about the grading policy for a minute. You have mentioned, and I don't remember your exact wording, but you had mentioned student behavior and its relationship to grades. Can you explain that, what you meant?
Sure. So, you know, I think it's important when you look at a standards-based approach to grading, you want to make sure that you're being objective. So, for example, I'll give you an example of a child. Maybe that's the best way to answer the question. If you have a child who is above grade level, who is meeting expectations, who is passing their SOL assessments, who is completing their classwork and is not turning in their homework, and they get zeros for their homework, or they get a 50 for their homework, which is on a 10-point band, that child is exceeding at a high level. And yet, if they continue to get a 0 or a 50 for not completing homework, that child's grade would drop significantly. And that would not be an accurate reflection of what that child is able to do. And so that's where, you know, we want to make sure that our grading is based on what they're learning and maybe not how they are student behavior.
So what you're saying is that we need to ensure that our grades are measuring just progress towards mastery. And if we're basing grades on work completion, we're no longer measuring progress towards mastery. How do we address those behaviors like not doing homework?
So I think that you know, how we address that is through relationship building. It's through reaching out to parents. It's communicating with parents. It's talking about, you know, what is happening with that child. It's through our counselors, our school counselors. It's through our school psychologists. I think there's a number of ways that we want to, you know, come alongside students and families to make sure that they are aware of what's happening. But we also, again, we want to make sure that their grades are accurately reflecting what they're learning. It's the opposite as well too. We want to make sure if a child is getting a grade, you know, and is a very high grade, but yet they're below reading level, they're not passing their SOLs, and yet they have a very high grade on their report card, that's not accurate either. So we want to make sure that we are being as objective as we can in terms of what students are learning, and that's why I say shifting from a focus on just teaching to a focus on what students are learning, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just checking to see if I still have more questions. I think for now, that's all my questions, so thank you, and thank you for explaining in depth. Appreciate it.
Mrs. Williams, you have another question?
Well, does anybody else have any other questions? That conversation just brought up, it really just clarified my thought process. Several years ago, 5 years ago, we as a nation, I'm not talking about Manassas City, want to reduce tests. And it sounds like to me now what we're doing is perhaps increasing tests or increasing assessments so we can understand what each student is learning and that they are learning what they need to be learning.
Sure.
Is that do I understand that shift?
I think it's, what I would say is that we want to give frequent formative assessments. And formative assessments may look different in different ways. It's not always a test.
Okay.
And so, you know, I think when we talk about testing, we're typically thinking an image in our head goes to multiple choice, you know, fill in the blank, whatever we want to do. When we're talking about assessment, it could be a piece of classwork that is a graphic organizer that students complete independently. And so that to me is different than a test. And so what I would say is I don't know that we're necessarily increasing testing, but we are trying to increase assessing. And that looks very different in very different classrooms, very different grade levels. It could be, you know, through a guided reading small group where a student is having a conversation with a teacher about what they're reading and comprehension, and they're sitting there and they're not even know they're being assessed, and the teacher's completing a checklist. Yes, the child knows this, yes, the child knows that. And so I don't know that it would be a accurate characterization that we are increasing testing, because that's certainly not what we want to do. We also don't want to make sure that we are very intentional about how we are assessing so that we're not detracting from instructional time. You know, as we talked about previously, we have been very intentional and very purposeful in looking at making sure that there's consistency across the really the division with our master schedules. And so we're making sure that we have uninterrupted long blocks of instructional time, and we don't want to interfere with that in any way, because that will also have a positive impact on student achievement.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other further questions or comments? All right, Mr. Gefeller and Dr. Casada, thank you very much for the update, and thank you to everyone on your team and all our educators throughout Manassas City Public Schools. So it's been nice that we've been able to capitalize on these strategies already and see some progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up is board member comments. I'd like to call on our student representatives to the school board first. Ms. DeBeepy.
Good evening, everyone. I just have two comments really quickly. First, I would just like to say that as the marking period is coming to a close, I hope everyone had a good first quarter and can make the second one an even better one. And secondly, I would just like to thank all those who are constantly working on projects like the student achievement plans. Your work is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Island.
Hello. I just wanted to say I'm glad that everybody's improving with the test scores and everything. I'm glad that everybody's getting the education that they deserve. And I'd also like to wish everybody luck for the PSAT and SAT tomorrow. I know everybody's excited for that. And I'd also like to say thank you to everybody that's participating in wearing blue and orange for Bullying Prevention Month. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Island. Mr. Iqbal.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. I think it was really great to hear tonight about all the things our students and staff are doing in the spirit of Bullying Prevention Month. I hope we all can take a chance to reflect this month on ways we can encourage kindness and discourage hostility in our community. And I also want to wish everyone a happy Hispanic Heritage Month. I had the pleasure of attending the festival at Osborne this past weekend, and it was a great time for all who came out. I hope this event happens again in the future so that we can continue to celebrate diversity in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Spall.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to tell a brief recap of my week. I laid to rest two important friends from my life this week. I'd start with the second because it happened today. A childhood friend whose support I always felt in every step of my life was laid to rest. The first was a teacher from Manassas City Public School whose caring dedication for ESOL kids and reading recovery were beacons for me as I was deciding what kind of citizen I wanted to be as an adult. So I just felt it was a duty to speak to their influence on my life. I will miss them, Rodney and Betsy, dearly, but I'm so thankful for the time we spent together. So it's been a trying week, and the ideas of participation, involvement, caring, planning, and results keep cropping up for me. I believe these are the things that help complete a happy life on this earth, and I encourage you to hug your loved ones tight, as our time together is never certain. I'd also like to just, a couple school-related things, say that a shout out to our liaisons who are always prepared and insightful, so I appreciate you guys always being where you need to be and when you need to be. Shout out to field hockey for their senior night that we had to miss tonight for this meeting. I do applaud all of our bullying prevention efforts throughout the division, and I encourage everyone to remain unapologetically kind. Hispanic Heritage Month and Latin American Studies Hispanic Festival was awesome, and I'd just like to end by reminding everyone that our diversity in Manassas City Public Schools is our strength. I guess the last thing is just regarding a comment that I wanted to say, that Parents as Educational Partners at Osborne is a wonderful resource. I'm not sure of the date of the next meeting, but I'm sure that it's widely available on the Osborne website, and that family liaisons are also more than happy to share those dates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Spall. Mrs. Williams.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair. I just want to truly thank the staff, Mr. Gefeller, Dr. Casada, for all the work that is going to be taking place, that is taking place, that is going to continue to take place. It's important work, very important work. I can assure you, every single one of us sitting around this dais tonight wants nothing but to meet our goals in the next 5 years. In 5 years, we're going to be celebrating. And I think this system is the right system to put in place. I'm sure there's plenty of research, and we just need to make sure everything we do is done right, and we've just got to be on top of it so that we can readjust and change as we need to. So I appreciate you all coming here often and reporting as to progress. And it is progress, and we will get there. I always appreciate you clarifying some of my questions I have. Mr. Beebe and Mr. Lung, thank you for all of your comments and your work up here. I always appreciate everything you have to say. PSATs and SATs are always very stressful, so thank you for mentioning that. Also, Anti-Bullying Month. I don't think it should be October. I think it should be every month throughout the entire year. So important to be kind to each other. Hispanic Heritage Month. What a great month it has been so far, and it's going to continue. We have so many different Hispanic type cultures in Manassas, and to see all the celebrations going on and continuing going on is great. And so many leaders in this community who have shined and grown their businesses. It really is something to be proud of. Do I have anything else? I think that's it. So thank you very much for everybody here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for everybody up here and your work. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank everybody, too. Thank you, Mr. Gefeller, and everyone, all the presentations. I appreciate your hard work. Shout out to the field hockey seniors. I wish I was out there. This past weekend, Saturday, I had the pleasure of joining the Osborne cheer squad as they competed and took third place, which brings them to nationals at Disney. Again, I'm a cheer dad, so I was getting it in with the cheerleaders this weekend. It was a long day, but to see the squad compete the way they did, knowing that their numbers were less, they may not have been as a large of a group as most of the other schools, but in typical Manassas city fashion, they competed and they fought hard, and it was a competition well earned and deserved. So shout out to Coach Orlando, and everyone have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Brooks.
Thank you, Chair Seberg. And thank you to everyone up here and out there, all our teachers and staff, all of the work that everyone is doing in this community to further our schools and the education of our children. I did want to say that I'm happy that tomorrow morning, all of the Manassas Ballet Theater education outreach programs are starting back up in person. So we will have groups from Baldwin Intermediate, from Mayfield, from Metz and Osborne, all coming to see live performances in the Hilton in person. And this is provided by grants and fundraisers that are done, so it's free of charge to our schools and our children. And so I just want to say, I'm happy to see that back and in person, and have a great year with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. Vice Chair Stevens.
Thank you. First, I wanted to talk for just a minute about the Orton-Gillingham approach in the Institute of Multisensory Education. We're very fortunate that we have so many teachers who are trained in it. It is the new science of reading, and it's one of the best ways to teach our children to read. It's a very holistic way to teach our children to read, and it's really based on direct instruction from the teacher, where the teacher is the person who knows best and the teacher is the one who's doing the right thing. It's one of the things that has always excited me, and especially when I heard we were doing it, I believe it was all of our special education teachers were being trained through the Institute of Multisensory Education. It's an approach that's research-based, that's backed by a huge body of science that shows that it works. And it doesn't just work for struggling readers, it works for children with reading disabilities, children with dyslexia. It works with all different kinds of populations of children, and it moves as quickly as the children are ready to move. So for me, that's a really exciting thing to hear that we're really incorporating it in. And next I wanted to talk about Saturday Learning Seminar. Saturday Learning Seminar is one of those hidden gems at Osborne High School. Right now it meets 2 Saturdays a month. Any high school, any Osborne student can attend. They don't have to make an appointment to attend. They can just show up. My son from 9th to 12th grade went to almost every single Saturday Learning Seminar, even when he didn't need help. He would hold on to his schoolwork till Saturday Learning Seminar, so he could sit and do it where he knew there were teachers who could help him if he needed help. And as an aside, he also went because breakfast was really good and it was made by parent volunteers and parents who donated lots of bacon and pancakes and breakfast burritos and donuts. So it was a win-win situation for him, and it was a win-win situation for us as parents, because we didn't have to stress about trying to help him with homework we didn't understand, and I'm a teacher. And I wanted to talk a minute about a Hispanic Heritage Month. Sunday, I was able to stop by the Osborne Hispanic Heritage Festival, and one of the things that struck me most was along the fence at the football field were all the different flags that represent countries that I don't even know the right way to say it, that are Hispanic countries. And what struck me was we oftentimes group our Hispanic community all together as one population. But looking at those flags reminded me, these are all very different people with very different cultures, backgrounds, histories, beliefs, and that we can't just recognize our Hispanic community as one solid thing. We need to recognize them as the individuals they are and the different cultures and traditions and histories they represent. And we really need to celebrate those and not let anyone lose those. So that was the thing that really struck me the most. Unfortunately, we forgot to bring money, so we couldn't spend any money. We were there, and my daughter was very upset not to get pupusas because she's discovered she really loves pupusas. But it was wonderful, and I look forward to being able to go next year and the year after and the year after that, and seeing how it grows and seeing what a learning opportunity it is for our community to go and to attend and to see how unique and how exciting and how vibrant the cultures are that make up Manassas. So thank you, and thank you Osborne students for putting that on for us. I think it was great. It was a wonderful inaugural event, so thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stevens. And I'm going to wrap things up by reminding everyone that we are now accepting nominations for the Mary V. Bucavaris Teacher of the Year Award from the Department of Education. You can submit nominations through October 31st, and the form is accessible on your school website under quick links. So If you have a special teacher in your life or special educator, please recognize them with a nomination. And your input is very important and valuable. And with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Chair, I move that the School Board of City of Manassas adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Hollingsworth, second by Mrs. Brooks, that the school board meeting adjourn. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. We are adjourned. Thank you.